What's going on, Apollo? As the topic of this TEDx talk is state of mind, for the next 12 to 15 minutes, I will allow you into mind. And so, who am I? Well, my name is Enoch Nacklin. I am 21 years old, and for all 21 of those years, I am proud to first identify as a New York City native and resident. Perhaps no prouder than I was last week, witnessing the New York Knicks capture their first elusive NBA title in over 50 years, bringing one home back to MSG, right in Manhattan. But my journey begins across the Brooklyn Bridge, Methodist Hospital, in the County of Kings. That is a place where the heavy, sweet smell of jerk chicken rises from grills decades old, filled with smoke and grime, serving a neighborhood that consists of 30% foreign-born residents, and of those, 67% were Caribbean, just like my family. I'd also grown up attending elementary and middle school at Excellence Boys Charter School, right in the heart of Bed-Stuy Do or Die, where vibrant murals of Jay-Z, Big E, and Big Daddy Kane stood tall on brick walls. And although I couldn't put sound to name to these artists until much, much later on in life, as my parents would never have allowed me to do so, I knew they were important because they remained permanent fixtures of this culture and the community that I'd learned to identify with. What I didn't know, what no one tells a pre-adolescent kid falling in love with the rhythm of these rich communities, is that to turn childlike curiosity into conviction in emerging adulthood would come at a massive, taxing cost. And today, I want to be completely and entirely honest about that cost. I want to talk about what happens when you climb this vertical ladder of success so fast that you can lose grip of the ground floor. To do so, let's time travel back to the isolation of COVID-19. Because when the pandemic hit, the entire world was forced to isolate, no doubt, but specifically New York, the media capital of the world and one of the richest cities in the world, was forced to shut down, and we all subconsciously felt it like none other. After all, we were now hooked on our devices for up to 8 hours a day, as our screens were the only things that could produce both human interaction and entertainment all in one. And as our attention migrated, so did our pockets. Social feeds became the marketplace in which we bought our newest Crocs, shoes, and clothes. And this new lane of currency opened up a path for thousands of people across the city, where power could now be harnessed through the ability to influence a community. Meanwhile, in this isolation, we were privileged. We were no longer required to pass by the countless homeless souls in torn clothing tucked in corners of the street. We weren't busybodies in suits racing to and from our respective MTA tracks, from home to school and work and back again, wondering about the countless faceless people in the 7,000 high-rise buildings constituting the New York City skyline. Instead, we remained half-clothed, many of us, in the comfort of our homes, navigating the entire world just one through a 9x16 digital screen. For many Americans, this presented a daunting but unique opportunity to look inward, to focus, and to distinguish any hidden talents that you might have had. For me, I learned that I loved to journal. And by love, I mean, I don't know what I would have done if not for a pen, pencil, keyboard, camera even, something, anything to reflect on my life. And as I became curious about who I was at 14, 15, and who I could be as the world returned to normalcy, I unknowingly convicted myself to being an observer and a preserver of community. I thought by writing specific and intimate retellings of local newsworthy events in my community that I could be both a voice for the voiceless and a return of investment, that I could become a local journalist. And so, by the time I was 16, right at the tail end of the pandemic, I published my very first professionally recognized piece with Youth Communication, one of the longest-running youth journalism platforms in the city. I wrote about gentrification, but not in a way to define this generalizing, sweeping term. I wanted the readers to define this huge concept through my community's struggles. So I chronicled the micro shifts, something only a New York City native and resident could identify, like the familiar faces on a basketball court disappearing in the happenings of a summer, or how many of us New Yorkers could remember the moment the Arizona iced tea bottles went from just $1 to $1.25, which, no, I'm still not over, but by holding on to these tiny price tags, I was able to both document the reality of millions of people across the nation, but also give my community an identity, physically on paper and digitally through newsletters. Over the course of the next 5 years, I would go on to produce 30 of these intimate stories. I defined code switching through the subconscious act of being back straight as your teacher passes by for a sticker or prize. I defined imposter syndrome through the transition from a predominantly black middle school to having to earn a spot into a predominantly white and Asian specialized high school. I used my young body to connect the grandiose of New York City with the raw, lived experiences of the peers and neighborhoods I grew up in. Through this transition, I went from high school to college, a fresh 18-year-old, and how many of us could remember what it feels like to be 18 years old? I called it being an adult baby. A baby, just one with a resume. And with mine, I applied to culturally rich organizations, first in my backyard with African Voices magazine, platforming artist in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn. But then, soon after, across that Brooklyn Bridge in Manhattan, Harlem to be exact, with the New York Amsterdam News, who allowed me to cement 6 of these stories within the broader framework of the oldest black newspaper in the city. I'd even begun to capture some of these community highlights on camera and uploading them onto Instagram, growing a slow but steady following of 100 and 200 followers. I saw a path upward, this vertical ladder of success, where I could be one of the few young voices, not just representing my own community, but multiple across the 5 boroughs. And so I began to climb, not knowing that within this alignment, with this conviction to represent so many souls in one singular body, that my identity would become malleable, easy to bend and fit into the people and places that influenced me. And as I began to climb as fast as I could, I was pulled upward into the spaces of the elite. The climb was dizzying. I was no longer on the pavement, no longer Caribbean flags lining the avenues and stepping over broken concrete to set up my tripod as the literal staging ground of my work. Instead, I was invited into boardrooms where the cold, heavy wooden doors blocked out the raw sound of the street below. I sat in rolling chairs with built-in microphones on the table, positions where you didn't even have to lean forward much to be heard. And the technology was flawless. I mean, cameras automatically tracked what seemed to be the blinking of your eye to project your face onto TV screens in every direction. I kid you not. I was invited into high society galas with ceilings as high as the sky can touch, and surrounded in a room full of elders who did not look like me, occasionally bidding to pour capital into communities I'd only been able to document. I saw that I was a way in. I got a hyper-focused sense of direction, a purpose. And in exchange, at just 19 years old, I was writing local newspapers and hosting local events with the highest caliber of community talent. I'd even begun to grow my following from 400, 500, 600 exponentially in the matter of a month. You see, on paper, I had everything I had convicted myself to do, to be one of the few representing so many communities in the media capital of the world. But in reality, something was missing. The very thing which had spurred my curiosity, the simple desire to fit into and preserve a community's identity which had poured so much into me. Where was the return of investment? And that is when the reality of identity became clear. My identity was the cost of turning curiosity into conviction, and by differentiating myself through individual talents had been a gift and a curse. And on top of that ladder, with so much left to climb, my conviction to be one of the few and not one of the many was finally questioned. And that is where I decided to climb down. Because perceived purpose of the self, this thing we know as our higher calling, what God has destined us to do, is what drives us to be greater, even perhaps than ourselves. But it is also purpose that, while being found throughout a lifetime, drags identity around for as long as you let it. But a wise mentor, my mom, once told me, we all have the power to change our narrative. And so while emerging adulthood carries a massive burden, there's also an immense privilege. I had to learn that I didn't just need to climb higher to hold value, because by doing so, I'd start judging people and places who were no longer worth my time. Instead, I could bridge a new framework, one that allows me to climb higher, but root myself horizontally in foundation. In that way, we can bridge this intergenerational divide between the permanent fixtures of culture and community with this new injection of digital media. To do this, I created a 3-step storytelling framework, one that preserves intimate journalism in the digital era. I called it the Chronicle Loop. And this 3-step process started with digging into the archives of neighborhood, but then using that knowledge to intentionally interview community talent and residents alike, and then bridging what was and what is with your own voice, all in a 90-second video. Now, it was through this Chronicle Loop at just 20 years old I was able to start a local business, connecting with successful, brilliant peers across the city. It was the avenues of promise and peril pointed out to me by Sean Dove that connected me to Harlem's pavement, not above. It was the story of local community artist Alethea Brown that brought us to the mayor's Juneteenth celebration just last year. And this is just two of countless artists across the city who became both mentors and peers. You see, if there's one thing that I learned throughout this journey, no matter who you are, what profession you're in, it's that curiosity without conviction is just observation without skin in the game. But conviction requires purpose. And so as you climb higher, but never forget your foundation. Because it's only as you remember your ground floor that your purpose comes full circle. Thank you.